Welcome back to Screen Sleuths. I'm Rob, and now that I've been resuscitated after that cliffhanger, let's talk about Episode 6, The Elements. We're going to dive into the evidence that's been laid out in the trial, and potentially the evidence we got even outside of the courtroom. But first and foremost, I'm concerned about Ray. So let me just start by saying I don't think they're going to kill off Raymond. Not having him around to see the end of the trial just seems unfair. But this incident does essentially bench him for the remainder of the case. Now this does a huge number on Rusty's defense because, as we've seen, Raymond has a particular knack for creating doubt within the jury regarding everything Tommy is bringing forward. Even if Michael, Carolyn's son, is doing his very best to convince everyone that Rusty is guilty. Additionally, the previous relationships between the former DA and the witnesses, mainly Kumagai in this episode, provide a highly specific benefit to the defense. The most difficult transition, however, will probably be the fact that more than likely Maya will be forced to handle the proceedings going forward. I can't imagine that Rusty would take any part in representing himself. So will this potentially change their tactics, knowing that Maya does not have the same level of connection or historical knowledge of Rusty the way that Ray does? We know that the current course of action would be to ensure that there was no definitive evidence proving his guilt, which the trial has had a difficult time providing. Dr. Kumagai makes it clear that he can only state that it was a homicide, but not who did it or where the murder weapon is. Buck, the next witness, made it clear that while Rusty's DNA was undeniably present on Carolyn's body, there wasn't a trace of anyone's DNA on the rope used to tie up Carolyn. This, along with the method of murder, points specifically to the killing being unplanned, but the crime scene setup was a meticulous act. Now, the two other witnesses that provide testimony are Michael, Carolyn's impressionable son, and Eugenia, last week's new suspect. I know that I still believe it's very possible Eugenia is responsible, and she seems a bit flustered during her questioning, leading to her potential involvement as well. This appears to me again as a large amount of screen time for a small amount of payoff. Through her answers, we essentially learned a lot of what we already knew about the situation. Carolyn had previously reported Tommy to HR and was asking to no longer work with him on cases. Eugenia was aware of their relationship, and she did not believe that it was appropriate, but she also didn't make it known either. There also seemed to be another private conversation that we weren't let in on between Eugenia and Carolyn, when Carolyn supposedly followed after her when she discovered them. Why was she covering for the two of them if she didn't approve? Did Carolyn convince her to do so at that time? Did she tell her even more, that Eugenia in turn ended up trying to cover by taking care of Carolyn? Now, in Michael's case, he may have missed the killer and mistaken them for Rusty due to the circumstances. Or, according to many other sleuths like us across the internet, it may have been Michael himself. Could the seemingly harmless but somewhat creepy estranged son have been so upset about his relationship that he planned to murder his mother out of anger? Is there a possibility that he is pushing so hard to implicate Rusty because he is worried that if Rusty isn't convicted, they may turn their attention to the one other person who was present at Carolyn's house that night? Now, all that to be said, there is one other alternative that has started to form in the last couple of episodes that is becoming more and more plausible. On last week's episode, based on the evidence we have and all of the characterization in the show, I stated rather emphatically that it really couldn't be Rusty. Okay, so what if that was wrong? Well, only in a certain sense. Rusty has time and time again doubled down on his innocence, to the point of rather aggressively denying a voluntary manslaughter plea that would have landed him in jail for 8 years and put an end to the uncertainty. However, there has been some imagery and discussion points within the show that have led to a strong theory that it actually was Rusty. We've been shown multiple instances of flashbacks between he and Carolyn that have at times made it hard to decipher whether he is remembering correctly or if it is just his imagination of what happened that evening. Also, the character himself has acted out multiple times in fits of anger, whether it was beating Brian Ratzer to a pulp or now grabbing Barbara after she told him about Cliff. I bring all this up to point to the possibility that while it may seem now that there were two people involved in Carolyn's murder, those two people could have been two very different sides of Rusty. Jaden asks her father about dissociation and how it can be caused when the brain does not want to remember something and creates false memories or blocks the real ones. Rusty states that his memory is fine, but does not actually provide a great answer to her concern. Our prevailing theory from this, as well as adding on the fact that the post-mortem crime scene had no traces of DNA, could point to the flashbacks we see of Carolyn's attack actually being carried out by Rusty himself. This idea could almost be called a modern version of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde story, where Rusty is unraveling into another extremely violent version of himself when he's overtaken with anger. Once his rage subsided and he returned to himself, he could have utilized his knowledge of the Bunny Davis case and his first-hand experience as a DA to attempt to cover his tracks and frame someone, anyone but himself, with the specificity of the recreation. He knew that Liam Reynolds had vied for revenge, and Rusty's push to identify the second sample, in this case Brian Ratzer, could have been his last-ditch effort to find the person that he was attempting to frame. Where are you at with the show? Has the answer been in front of us all along, and it really is Rusty? Or is it one, or even a combination, of the others in our rogues gallery of possible suspects? Tell us in the comments and let us know why. As always, if you are a fan of what we're doing here at the channel, please be sure to like and subscribe to let the ultimate judge, the algorithm, know that we're on the right track. And until next week, stay sleuthy.